So we're going now?
Yes,
Okay.
go ahead.
Is the slideshow going to go up or?
Yes, I'll put the slides up now for you.
Okay, cool. All right, well, welcome. We're doing relationships and progressions. It's called Opening to the Other Relationships and the Secondary Progress Chart. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about the secondary progress chart and how this comes into play with our natal chart, and especially in terms of our relationships. So I want to thank Deanna is our volunteer today, and she's going to be sharing some of her life and energy with us, and we're going to explore a little bit about how progressions reveal some important changes in terms of her relationships and her growth and everything. And she has a very interesting chart with this regard. So we're going to hopefully Gemini this up. Get some Gemini happening with it for sure. So the secondary progress chart, in case you don't know what that is, I'm not going to spend a lot of time describing this. I have done a few other EA Zoom meetings where if you want to get into a little bit more of that, you can go watch those. I want to try to get through this pretty quick so we can spend more time with Deanna. So secondary progress chart, it's the basic idea is that one solar day has this resonance with one solar year. So there's a way that I think about that as the part equaling the whole, like the idea of one solar day resonating with one entire solar year sort of reveals how that part or the microcosm kind of taps us into this deeper meaning of the vaster whole. And so each day after your birth is corresponding with each year of your life when you're using progressions. So if you want to find out the chart for when you're 30 years old, you're basically looking at a chart for 30 days after you're born. And so this idea of using an ephemeris is one great way. As you start getting more comfortable with using progressions, you'll start learning how you can open up an ephemeris and get a really good feel for how somebody's progressions are going to play out for them, just in terms of even just looking at an ephemeris. So the meaning of the secondary progress chart, it's really about this inner potential that we have, what we're opening to in our life, and what we're ready to receive. So a lot of times we talk about the natal chart as revealing the seed of our potential, our evolution. And then if that's the case, where we're at in the process of becoming who we are going to become, you can access that through looking at the secondary progress chart. So in one sense, it's definitely this idea of, we're becoming or we're evolving or growing into some person that we're meant to be. There's also this idea of a return to ourself and who we are. So in terms of relationships, we can think about it as like this tree of life. So, we have the seed of our natal chart. So in a way we can think about progressions as being this tree that there's this ascent where we're through the progression, we're kind of expanding out with branches and evolving towards everybody. And then there's also this part where we are coming within and returning into like descending down to kind of like our root structure. So I really think about it in terms of that sort of like growth outwardly, and also this like descent inwardly into our roots. And I'm not sure what's going on the screen, but there's like a bunch of stuff happening. I don't know if that matters or not. Or if people, but I know I can't actually see whatever's happening. I can't see the slides very well right now. I don't know if everybody else is getting that or not.
Ray, can you see them now? Can you see
a little bit out of focus, and then there's a bunch of like things up on the screen. I can see people like hitting little numbers or something. I don't know what that is.
Diana's got a cold, and she wanted me to mute her, so sorry about that.
That's okay. It's fine. In terms of how it plays out with relationships, we have in a way this idea of, this moment that we're born, and we cast this natal chart for this moment, and we have all these techniques we use to that natal chart in that moment of our birth. And there's a lot of aspects about our natal chart that we often get very fixated upon. So you have like Mars square Pluto, or, Uranus opposite your moon, or, whatever it is. And we talk about these things in terms of everything has to do with these aspects in our natal chart. But by progressions, we start unlocking these things. There's movement. So it's kind of showing where you're becoming, and there's movement away from what these natal charts are. And so in terms of relationships, it's sort of revealing who we're becoming on these internal magnetic levels. So there's one part, it's kind of showing who are we attracting to us in our life. Who's showing up for us at this particular time. And there's a resonance there through the progress chart, that when you're applying the progress chart back to your natal chart, it's showing, why are you meeting this person at this particular time? There's also then who we are attracted to, and, who do we want to have in our life? What types of relationships do we want in our life? And that is also shown through the progress chart. So often when two people meet each other, and let's say people meet and there's like this really deep connection, and it's really profound, there's often going to be really strong synastry between those people. There's probably some really strong aspects in their composite chart. However, with progressions, there tends to also be something significant about the progress chart of one person to the other person's natal chart, or the two progress charts together. There's something that you'll see with progressions that's kind of revealing to you, why are you meeting this person at this particular time? That part of it we're not going to really talk about today so much. We're going to talk more about just Deanna's chart and what progressions reveal about her. So you can move on to the next slide. So some of the things to pay attention to are and again, I don't know if it's still the same, but it's hard to see the slides a little bit, but maybe it's better for other people. I mean, as long as other people can see it. It says, so one thing is you want to always pay attention to when are planets changing signs, and what's the meaning of that change. You also want to pay attention to when planets are changing houses, including approaching angles. A really good example of this right now is actually Donald Trump. In his progress chart, he just went into having a Virgo sun, which is right on his angle of his ascendant. So he was basically elected president with his progress sun approaching his angle, approaching his ascendant, and a shift. So he's getting a shift from going from Leo right into Virgo. So he's at the very start of this Virgo thing in his progress chart. And that's what you'll see often. People come into prominence when a planet crosses like the angles, ascendant, descendant, midheaven, IC. You want to pay attention to when planets station retrograde or station direct by progression. You really want to pay attention to Mercury, Venus, and Mars. And we're going to talk about this today with Deanna. She has very important Venus and Mercury retrogrades. You're going to then look at the new aspects made within the progress chart between planets, and then in synastry. So the natal chart aspects you have, they're going to start changing with the progress chart. The synastry you have with somebody is going to change through time, again, by looking at the progress chart. And then you also want to pay attention to the moon phase. That's the phase between the sun and the progress moon. So we can go to the next one then. In terms of that, this is just like a little rough estimation of this. And so it's going to play out differently for different people. With Deanna, she is born in a full moon phase, kind of a little bit into the full moon phase, but she is in the full moon phase natally. And so the way it played out for her, I believe she was maybe like 12 or so when she comes into the new moon. This is always going to play out a little bit differently for different people. And right now, she's actually in a full moon. So she's, in her lifetime so far, she's born the full moon, she swung around, hit that new moon, and then around the year 2000, and then right now, as we're talking, she is in a progressed full moon phase, which is the whole flowering of this entire cycle. And we'll give her a chance to talk about this in a moment. We can go to the next slide. I think that might be her chart. Okay, awesome. So on this chart, you can see there she has a very, very powerful chart. Obviously, just from taking a glance at that. And then there's also really powerful progressed aspects happening. So one thing, when she had this progressed new moon, it was over here in towards the end of Taurus, pretty close to where you see she has her Mercury. So one thing with EA I didn't mention that you can kind of pay attention to a little bit more is the lunar nodes and looking at the rulers of the lunar nodes and how those are playing out by progression. You can see here Diana has south node of the moon in Virgo in her 11th house. And so Mercury is the south node of the moon ruler. And she had this new moon in the year 2000 right on her Mercury. And we can just kind of start with this. So at that point, she was still living in Peru. I don't know, Diana, you want to come in at all with that at all? This has been in like April of 2000.
Yes. So I have a cold, so you guys are going to have to excuse me. In 2000, my family decided to move to the States. My dad was transferring jobs here to Northern Nevada, which is where I live. So the whole process, the decision was made in 2000. And then, of course, I was 12 years old. So it took some time to get the visas going and getting us out of school. And we actually moved here in 2001, June. And I went through all that transition to a different culture with not speaking English very well. I did learn it in elementary school, but I never got to practice it. So I had to start all over again. And that was a little challenging, but it took about 2 years and I'm good now.
Yeah, so let's look at a little bit about her chart. So one thing that's really important there is the progressed new moon tends to be really important. In this case, it's obviously monumentally important as far as this huge move, huge dramatic change of culture and where Deanna was living. So she, again, at the new moon, her family kind of got the idea to move to America, and it started getting in motion, and about a year later they did. And so that's that sort of, so we have this general idea, we know, okay, that it was happening with her moving to the United States of America. Again, it was kind of right here, pretty close to her Mercury, which, is in her 7th house, and it does rule her south node of the moon. So I'm sure everybody by now has noticed that Deanna has Scorpio Pluto pretty much right on her ascendant, but technically at the very, very end of the 12th house. We know that's very important. And then you also probably notice she has a Sun-Jupiter conjunction on the polarity point of Pluto, which also happens to be her descendant, exactly. So that's one of many important things for her about relationships that she has. You may also by now have noticed, well, we also know she's born a full moon, which is another kind of relationship thing, right? And then you're also going to hopefully notice he has this awesome Venus-Chiron conjunction, like I do, actually, but hers is more close than mine. And with Diana, this Venus-Chiron in Gemini, this squares her lunar nodes. And so the resolution of that Venus-Chiron in Gemini, which is in the 8th house, is to the Pisces north node of the moon in the 5th house. So again, there's some very strong relational signatures there. And again, that Venus is ruled by that Mercury in the 7th house. I don't know. And then also that Venus is widely, you might not notice it at first because they're in different signs, but she has a Venus-Uranus opposition. And it's actually also opposite Saturn. So you may notice she has Saturn conjoining Uranus at the very beginning of Capricorn, down there in her second house. And that's opposite her Venus Chiron, which is another thing that me and her have been talking about. We can hopefully bring in, because I also have a Venus-Uranus opposition, but hers is a little bit more badass here with the Saturn. So let's see. I don't know if you want to say something about that, about just that basic relationship structure in your natal chart. Yeah, no, you and then I can go from there if you want.
Are you talking about the Taurus, Scorpio polarity?
Yeah, and the Venus, and just like your natal.
Yeah, it all ties together. It all ties together. With that polarity, very fixed in nature. That's been part of me since I can remember. Black and white, in or out. Long-term commitments. I'm not much to do, the casual thing. And I think that's very relevant of the 8th house Venus as well. And the one thing that I'll have to say about that Scorpio Taurus polarity, the negative aspect of it that I experienced was holding on to partnerships when I should have let them go. They expire, they have an expiration date, but there it is, the stubborn Taurus holding on. And I think this was a bit sabotaging for me, but I got through it. And I also realized that wanting that commitment within that relationship, but also needing that space, that's where Uranus comes in. Needing that freedom within that relationship.
Yeah, so, and that's one of the things we're going to see how this comes a lot more in with her relationships with the progressions and this opening to this. And we have talked actually before this meeting, and it was interesting to me, I would just say, with me myself having a Venus Chiron that's also opposite Uranus in my chart, although it's in totally different signs and different houses. There's a lot of stuff that really resonates with me with that signature that she was mentioning. And one of those things actually is this idea of this inner freedom, needing to create the space for an inner freedom, yet wanting to have a committed relationship at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because we've talked about this before, and it is through that freedom that, for me, how I experience it, it's so imperative to have it because it allows me to be a better partner, Mm-hmm. And also with that Venus Chiron in the 8th house in Gemini, the importance for me to be able to have deep conversations with my partner, and I think this type of interaction allows for that healing, for that the Chiron aspect that's in there. So certainly somebody who is honest, open, and mature enough to have those deep conversations, which it's a very healing influence of that relationship, I believe.
Yeah, and one of the things I want to bring in here with the Gemini, one of my sort of pet peeves sometimes when we're doing EA talks is people will get talking about like Gemini is like linear and logical, and that is maybe like this much of like Gemini. And if you're also saying Mercury is linear and logical, it's like, make that even smaller of like what Mercury is and what Gemini is, and you're really underestimating and not getting Gemini if you're just thinking of Gemini as being linear and logical, because it's not even. I mean, that's sometimes Geminis are linear and logical, but there's way more going on. And one of the things, so, is that the deep conversation you're saying, the curiousness, the strong mental connections, the expansion of the mind, finding lots of different connections, finding other perspectives, and opening up that viewpoint. And that can be done in a completely non-linear manner. With regards to Deanna, this is even more the case. Because there's a lot to say about this chart. It's like really fascinating. And I'm hoping we can at least get a couple points in here. So one thing with progressions, you're going to see right away, she's a Gemini sun. So there's already a big emphasis. She's Taurus, like she's saying, but she's already moved into being a Gemini sun. And that Gemini sun is, opposite her Sagittarius moon. And it's already creating a lot of different kind of aspects in her chart. One thing, too, is really interesting about her with regards to the freedom. She's got that Pluto, Sun, Jupiter powerhouse Scorpio Taurus thing, right? I mean, it's really powerful. But then you look down at the bottom, she's got Mars in Aquarius squaring it. And Mars in Aquarius is going to bring in this, like, that sense of feeling the freedom is going to already kind of shake up what you would normally be seeing with somebody really strong Scorpio Taurus, because she's got that Aquarius at the same time she has to integrate. And then, of course, Gemini trines Aquarius. And so this is going to even more kind of play this up. So the big changes that have happened, her Aquarius Mars has moved into Pisces now. And we know Pisces is her north node. And in Pisces now, it's actually forming a sextile to her Neptune, which is in the 3rd house, another sign of this deep communication. Then the progressed sun has moved into Gemini. Her progressed moon right now is in Sagittarius. And what's happened, you don't always see this, but because Deanna has a retrograde Uranus at 0 degrees of Capricorn, it has already in her lifetime changed signs. And she now has a Sagittarius Uranus. And her progressed moon right now is coming to conjoin Uranus. It's only about 5 degrees away from her Uranus right now. So she's getting this by progression. This full moon phase she's in right now is getting this really strong Uranus energy with her progressed moon coming into that. So that's going to even more play up this idea of her needing to have this sense of inner freedom within relationships.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've always operated from a very fixed place, very, very fixed. And I think to the fact that in my natal chart, the moon is unexpected. So this was like a blind spot. I very much ignored my moon, right? Being unexpected. But I think the whole progression with the sun in opposition to it, it pretty much triggered it. And I'm going to say probably a year ago or so is when I started to embrace my sense of freedom and how much it kind of helped balance that fixed polarity that I have going on. And yeah, it's certainly a blessing to have that Sagittarius moon now making an aspect. And as you said, with the with that Uranus moon now in progression, even more, the freedom is just part of me now, and I can't be without it. Like I said, it helps me, gives me that time and space to integrate, to go deeper within when it comes to that Venus Chiron and when it comes to that polarity and that T-square. So it allows for that time and space, that freedom does.
Yeah, and the progressed full moon was about a year ago or so, and it was actually right on her moon. It was really close. The progressed full moon phase came in like really close to her natal moon, so it definitely got triggered there. So the big thing, though, is with the retrogrades. And so when you have planets go retrograde in your progress chart, it ends up getting really concentrated on a degree for a while. So Venus has gone up it went up to 0 Cancer, station retrograde, and right now is at the very end of Gemini, retrograding back towards her natal Venus. Mercury earlier this year, station retrograde at the end of Gemini, and she now also has Mercury retrograde in Gemini, coming back towards that natal Venus. And remember that natal Venus in Gemini is her skip step. It's this issue that she really has to face in her lifetime. And she's getting both Venus retrograde and Mercury retrograde, moving over, just concentrating on that, along with Chiron. And they move really slow. So, Venus stationed kind of a little while ago, but it really hasn't been moving for years. And so that's really pulling. Well, it's been moving now, but it's been in this degree range for a really long time because of it moving so slow. And so Venus moving retrograde, she's really getting pulled very even more deep within herself to discover that Venus. And then at the same time, her Mercury, which again rules her south node of the moon, she's born with a direct Mercury, but she's now shifted with perception into this retrograde Mercury. And she's more at the beginning of that right now. So that's definitely not a logical linear Gemini Mercury. That's a very deep, penetrating, non-linear, symbolic, intuitive, sensing kind of the inner world, able to notice symbols and omens and understanding that kind of deeper layer, of language and expression and everything. So, and it's all concentrating right on her Venus. And she ends up with really interesting things long-term coming up ahead where this is all kind of playing out. But again, so it's really, if you kind of notice this, it's breaking up that Taurus, that fixed, super strong fixed energy. By progression, she's getting all this energy directed at her Venus and Gemini with the Venus retrograde, Mercury retrograde on there with Chiron. Is there anything about that you'd like to say more than we've said already?
No, everything is good. Everything fits together. The fact that there is the Uranus Moon conjunction, that freedom. It's like so amazing, and it's so perfect for this time as I am being asked, to go deeper within myself. So in order to integrate that Venus, which for me, my earlier relationships have been a big trigger of that. So I feel like I've already done some work on that, but now it's like going a little deeper, like you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's see where I have this in my notes, where this went. So just for y'all to get a sense of this, Venus went up to 0 Cancer. So from like 2002 until 2011, her Venus was basically just at 0 Cancer. It was 9 years. And that's because it just was moving so slow in her chart. And it actually stationed retrograde in 2006. So it's been retrograde now for about 10 years. But it's only moved a few degrees back into Gemini. So that's hopefully gives you a sense of this for her. Because if you have Venus go retrograde in your chart, it's going retrograde for at least 40 years. In fact, with Deanna, it's going retrograde until 2050. And it's gone all the way back to 14 Gemini. So and then with Mercury retrograde, when Mercury goes retrograde in your chart, you're going to have that for at least 20 years. And Deanna's going to have it until about 2040. And we know coming up, if we're going to kind of look ahead at, what do we know is kind of taking shape in her chart with all of this. In 2028 and 2029, that kind of period, she's going to come into a progressed new moon that's right on her Venus. And Venus retrograde and Mercury, the progressed Mercury and Venus retrogrades are all going to be there at the same place. So we know we're heading eventually, 13 years from now, so we're getting this where she's at the full moon phase now, but we know she's heading to eventually to get this new moon where it's all lining up right on that Venus, with the Venus retrograde and the Mercury retrograde all in that same general area. And so this is somebody who has this Venus Chiron squaring the nodes, and I mean she is learning this on as deep a level as I think you can probably get in somebody's chart. And you know, right, especially then obviously having the Pluto on the ascendant, and it's the Pluto is so strongly set off also relationally. And then the other thing we haven't talked as much about is the Mars, but I that's very significant too, to go from a Mars in Aquarius into a Mars in Pisces, you know, which is more flexible, it's more mutable, and it's really bringing out that North Node 5th house direction for her. And it's already forming this really sextile with her Neptune in the 3rd house. And so there's this sense too where her, you know, desire nature is going much stronger in that Pisces, Neptunian 5th house dimension, you know, combined with all the Gemini to just really go deep with her, you know, whatever she's exploring mentally. And then there'd be some strong mental connections, of course, with relationships. But one of the things that really stood out to me, this idea that these progressions really helping her create the space in her life to really give her that sense of inner freedom. And it's an important point, I think, that doesn't mean, you know, having lots of, I mean, that doesn't mean you can't have it and not have a committed relationship. So her having that, you know, desire to have a committed, you know, honest relationship, it just needs to at the same time give her, you know, allow her to have the space to have the inner freedom. Do you think, does that sound accurate?
Yes, absolutely. And that's the exact representation of that Saturn with the conjunct the Uranus, you know, which is supposed in the Venus. As you can see in my charts, very committed type. Can't do the casual. We talked about that. But it is, you know, my inner values, 2nd house, commitment, with freedom. And for the good of all, right? Because having this freedom, in my opinion, allows me to be a better partner, because I can work through that square that I got going on with the skip step with Venus and the North Node and South Node.
Yeah, is there anything else about Venus, the Venus Chiron in particular in the 8th house with the Gemini?
I would just like to, for me, how I experience it, it's the importance, like my need of, in a relationship, given it's the 8th house and it's Venus, in relationships, how important it is for me to be with somebody who is not afraid to delve deeper into subconscious matters, you know, when triggered, and to work through stuff. And of course, this takes two open people, mature, and who have done a little bit of work on themselves. So yeah, I guess that's one of my fundamental needs when it comes to relationships, because as I said before, it allows for healing, you know, to be able to interact in this way.
Yeah, I love that with the Gemini, because I feel like another thing with Gemini, sometimes it gets characterized as this kind of superficial sign, and Gemini can actually go very deep, and especially the idea of Gemini going into the subconscious, unconscious realm, and really exploring it and being willing to communicate about it and be curious about it. And so you have the Sagittarius side, right, with the moon, and so there is still that she's got the Sagittarius going on in her chart. But, you know, sometimes that Sagittarius can get a little bit full of itself, like it really knows what's going on. You know, it just its truth is what it is, and it's so intuitively locked in. It just knows what's going on. And Gemini and Mercury always is functioning as, or, you know, Virgo too to the Pisces, as, you know, kind of breaking that up and kind of showing you what you don't actually know. And
exactly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think having that Earth in me also helps balance those energies in my natal chart. You know, the realistic part of it, that's just part of who I am. So it helps that the Sagittarius from getting too out there, you know, if you know what I mean. It grounds it. It grounds those energies.
Is there anything? Yeah. Is there anything else about like the nodes at all? Like either one you want to either one, like either Pisces 5th or the Virgo 11th.
I can say that now the Mars has progressed into Pisces and is making a nice aspect to Neptune. I've naturally more harmoniously, I innately feel more into the Piscean realm. And it's interesting too as I keep meeting more and more Pisces people, you know, to kind of, it's interesting how that works.
Yeah, and that's going to be going on for a while. Yeah, so that Pisces Gemini, with her progress chart in particular, you're not always going to see that. For her, it's very concentrated because when you get Venus and Mercury going retrograde like that, they're not going anywhere. So they're going to be in Gemini for a really long time. You know, somebody else's chart, if you're having those planets move direct, they're going to kind of change some signs. But Deanna's going deep into Gemini, going deep into Pisces. And then that Mars is, you know, as that Venus, Mercury is going so deep into Gemini, Mars is just moving along steadily towards her Ceres and North node. She has Ceres and Pisces too there. What about Mercury in your 7th and Taurus ruling the South node? Would you want to say anything about that for you?
I just think that it emphasizes on relationships right there on the 7th house. You know, it's like it's a big theme, and I feel like all these themes on relationships, challenges, whatever, it's all to help that Venus balance those energies.
Okay, great. We have about 20 seconds left.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for whoever's listening to this, and thank you, Deanna, for participating.
That was
Thank
wonderful.
you so much.
Thank you very much, Gray, and thanks, Diana. That was fantastic.
Yeah, thank you.